The Vanishing of Flight 914, a sleep story that transcends time. Chapter 1. The morning that changed everything. Some secrets hide in plain sight for decades, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. On the morning of July 2nd, 1955, the first rays of sunlight painted Miami International Airport in gentle shades of gold and amber. The air carried that distinctive warmth of South Florida summer, thick with humidity and the lingering scent of salt from the nearby ocean. Palm fronds rustled softly in the morning breeze, creating a gentle percussion that mixed with the distant hum of aircraft engines, warming up for another day of routine flights across the Caribbean. Captain William Morrison stood before the bathroom mirror in the pilot's lounge, adjusting his crisp white uniform for what he believed would be a perfectly ordinary flight to Caracas, Venezuela. The 35-year-old pilot had flown this route dozens of times before, navigating the azure waters between Florida and South America with the confidence that comes from years of experience. His hands, steady and sure, smoothed down his dark hair one final time before placing his captain's cap at the regulation angle. Can you feel the weight of routine in that moment? The way familiar actions can carry us forward without any hint of the extraordinary waiting just beyond the horizon. In the passenger terminal, 57 souls prepared for their journey, each carrying their own hopes, dreams, and expectations for the day ahead. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, a 73-year-old grandmother with silver hair neatly pinned beneath a small blue hat, clutched a leather purse containing the most precious cargo of all, a photograph of her infant grandson, Miguel, whom she was traveling to meet for the very first time. Her weathered hands trembled slightly with anticipation as she thought of finally holding the baby she had only seen in letters from her daughter. The photograph had been taken just 2 weeks earlier, showing a chubby-cheeked infant with dark eyes that seemed to hold infinite curiosity about the world around him. Mrs. Rodriguez had studied every detail of that image during the long nights of planning for this trip, memorizing the curve of his tiny fingers, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the temples, the serene expression on his sleeping face. Thomas Chen, a 28-year-old accountant from New York, sat in the departure lounge reviewing the papers for what he considered the most important business meeting of his career. The manila folder on his lap contained contracts and financial projections that could secure his promotion to senior partner at his accounting firm. He had spent weeks preparing for this presentation to potential clients in Venezuela, rehearsing every detail until he could recite the numbers in his sleep. The young man adjusted his tie nervously, a habit he had developed during stressful situations. His wife, Mary, had kissed him goodbye at their apartment that morning, reminding him to call as soon as he arrived in Caracas. They had been married for only 18 months, and this was the longest they would be separated since their honeymoon. Thomas had promised to bring her back something special from South America, perhaps a piece of jewelry or a hand-woven textile from one of the local markets. But the most intriguing part of this story begins not with the passengers, but with the mysterious weather pattern that was forming approximately 200 miles southeast of Miami, invisible to radar and impossible to predict using any meteorological science available in 1955. Co-pilot David Chen, no relation to passenger Thomas Chen, completed his pre-flight inspection of the Douglas DC-4 with meticulous attention to detail. The 29-year-old aviator had served as a navigator during World War II, flying missions over the Pacific that had taught him to trust his instruments above all else. His trained eye examined every gauge, every switch, every indicator light in the cockpit with the precision of a watchmaker examining a delicate timepiece. The weather reports for their flight path showed clear skies and favorable winds, perfect conditions for the 3-hour journey to Caracas. The Douglas DC-4, nicknamed Silver Wanderer by her crew, had been in service for 8 years without a single serious mechanical incident. Her 4 Pratt and Whitney engines hummed with the reliable rhythm that had carried thousands of passengers safely across the Caribbean waters. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal in both English and Spanish. Passengers began queuing at Gate 7, presenting their tickets to the uniformed airline attendant, who smiled warmly at each traveler while checking their documentation. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the terminal, casting long shadows across the polished terrazzo floors. Mrs. Rodriguez was among the first to board, moving slowly but with determination up the metal steps that led to the aircraft's passenger cabin. She paused at the top of the stairs to look back at the Miami skyline one final time, breathing deeply of the warm, humid air that carried the mingled scents of jet fuel, tropical flowers, and the endless ocean that stretched beyond the horizon. Can you smell those distinctive aromas of a 1950s airport? The way the air itself seemed to whisper promises of adventure and new discoveries in distant lands. Inside the cabin, flight attendant Patricia Williams helped passengers find their seats with the gracious efficiency that defined air travel in the 1950s. The 24-year-old woman had joined Pan American Airways straight from college, drawn by the glamour and excitement of international travel. Her uniform, a tailored navy blue dress with the distinctive Pan Am logo, represented everything sophisticated and modern about aviation in that era. Patricia's warm smile and southern accent made even the most nervous passengers feel at ease. She had memorized the names of every passenger on the manifest, a personal touch that set Pan American apart from other airlines. As she helped Mrs. Rodriguez settle into her window seat, Patricia noticed the elderly woman's photograph and commented on what a beautiful baby her grandson was. "He looks like he has your eyes, ma'am," Patricia said kindly, adjusting the small pillow behind Mrs. Rodriguez's back. "I'm sure he'll be absolutely delighted to finally meet his grandmother." Mrs. Rodriguez beamed with pride, carefully returning the photograph to her purse. "I've been waiting for this moment for months," she confided. "My daughter says he's already trying to sit up on his own. Can you imagine? 6 months old and already so eager to see the world." Thomas Chen took his seat 3 rows behind Mrs. Rodriguez, immediately spreading his business papers across the small fold-down table. He ordered coffee from Patricia and spent the remaining boarding time reviewing his presentation notes one final time. The numbers had to be perfect. There would be no second chance to make this crucial first impression with the Venezuelan investors. At 9:45 a.m., Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom system with the familiar warmth and confidence that passengers expected from their pilot. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome aboard Pan American Flight 914 with service from Miami to Caracas, Venezuela. We're expecting a smooth flight this morning with clear skies and favorable winds. Our flying time will be approximately 3 hours, and we should have you on the ground in Caracas right on schedule at 12:45 p.m. local time." The 4 engines of the Douglas DC-4 began their synchronized symphony, each Pratt and Whitney radial engine adding its voice to the chorus of mechanical precision. The propellers spun faster and faster until they became translucent discs catching the morning sunlight. Passengers felt the familiar vibration through their seats as the aircraft prepared for departure, a sensation that frequent travelers had learned to associate with the beginning of adventure. But what none of them could know was that this particular morning would mark the beginning of an adventure unlike anything in the history of human flight. Air traffic controller James Patterson settled into his position in the Miami control tower with his 3rd cup of coffee of the morning. The 42-year-old veteran controller had guided thousands of aircraft safely through South Florida airspace during his 15-year career. His practiced hands moved across the radar console with unconscious expertise, tracking the movements of various aircraft preparing for departure. Patterson's voice carried the calm authority of a man completely comfortable with his responsibilities. Flight 914, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 09. Wind is from the southeast at 8 knots. Visibility unlimited. Have a safe flight, Captain Morrison. The response came back immediately, clear and professional. Roger, Miami Control. Flight 914 cleared for takeoff, runway 09. Thank you, and good morning. As the Douglas DC-4 began its takeoff roll, Patricia Williams moved through the cabin one final time, ensuring that all passengers were properly secured for departure. She paused beside Mrs. Rodriguez's window seat, noticing that the elderly woman was gazing out at the landscape below with an expression of pure wonder. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Patricia commented, following Mrs. Rodriguez's gaze toward the endless expanse of turquoise water that stretched toward the horizon. "I never tire of seeing God's creation from up here," Mrs. Rodriguez replied softly. "Every flight reminds me of how vast and beautiful our world truly is." The aircraft climbed steadily through the morning sky, its silver wings catching the sunlight like a promise of safe passage. Captain Morrison leveled off at their assigned cruising altitude of 8,000 feet, while co-pilot Chen monitored their instruments and navigation equipment with the focused attention of a professional aviator. At exactly 10:30 a.m., everything appeared perfectly normal aboard Flight 914. But 13 minutes later, something would happen that would challenge every assumption about the nature of time, space, and reality itself. Can you sense it approaching? That moment when the impossible becomes inevitable, when the ordinary world suddenly reveals extraordinary secrets that have been hiding just beyond our perception. The first sign that something unusual was developing came from Thomas Chen, the passenger, not the co-pilot. The accountant had been reviewing his business papers when he noticed something strange through the window beside his seat. Instead of the expected view of endless blue ocean, he saw what appeared to be a cloud formation, unlike anything he had ever witnessed. The clouds formed a perfect spiral pattern, rotating slowly around a central point that seemed to glow with its own internal light. The formation was massive, easily several miles in diameter, and appeared to be moving toward their aircraft with deliberate purpose. The colors within the spiral shifted and changed as Thomas watched, displaying hues that seemed somehow more vivid than any natural phenomenon should possess. "Excuse me," Thomas called to Flight Attendant Williams, who was serving coffee to passengers in the forward section of the cabin. "Could you take a look at this cloud formation out here? I've never seen anything quite like it." Patricia made her way to Thomas's seat and peered out the small window. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The spiral cloud formation was unlike anything covered in her training manuals or aviation experience. The structure appeared almost crystalline in its perfection, with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and evolve as she watched. That's certainly unusual," Patricia said carefully, trying to maintain her professional composure while processing what she was seeing. "Perhaps I should mention it to the captain." But before she could move toward the cockpit, other passengers began noticing the phenomenon. Mrs. Rodriguez pressed her face to the window, her eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and concern. The spiral formation seemed to be drawing closer to their aircraft, and the light emanating from its center was growing brighter and more intense. "It's beautiful," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, her voice filled with awe, like looking into the eye of heaven itself. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison and co-pilot Chen were beginning to notice irregularities in their instrument readings. The compass needle was rotating slowly, unable to find magnetic north. The radio compass that normally provided precise navigation guidance was displaying readings that made no navigational sense. "Dave, are you seeing what I'm seeing on these instruments?" Captain Morrison asked his co-pilot, tapping the face of the compass with his finger. "I've never seen anything like it," co-pilot Chen replied, studying the various gauges and displays with growing concern. "It's as if we're encountering some kind of magnetic anomaly, but there's nothing on our charts that would account for this." Captain Morrison reached for the radio microphone to contact Miami Air Traffic Control, but when he depressed the transmission button, only static emerged from the speakers. He tried several different frequencies, but each attempt produced the same result: a wall of white noise that seemed to contain faint, indistinguishable voices speaking in patterns that almost sounded like language. "Miami Control, this is Flight 914, Morrison transmitted on the emergency frequency. "We are encountering unusual weather conditions, and our navigation instruments are malfunctioning. Please respond." The only answer was the strange, musical static that seemed to ebb and flow with its own mysterious rhythm. But it was Mrs. Rodriguez who first noticed the most extraordinary aspect of their situation. As she gazed out at the spiral cloud formation, she realized that time itself seemed to be behaving strangely. Her wristwatch, a reliable timepiece that had kept perfect time for over 20 years, was running slower and slower, as if each second was being stretched like taffy. "Patricia, dear," she called to the flight attendant, her voice carrying a dreamlike quality. "Look at your watch. Tell me what time you see." Patricia glanced at her wristwatch and frowned. The hands were moving so slowly, she could actually see their progress around the dial. "This can't be right," she murmured. "My watch must be broken." But when she looked around the cabin, Patricia realized that every passenger was experiencing the same phenomenon. Watches throughout the aircraft were slowing down in perfect synchronization, as if time itself was being drawn into the mysterious spiral that now surrounded their aircraft. Thomas Chen looked up from his business papers with an expression of profound peace settling over his features. "Do you know what's happening to us?" he asked Patricia, but his voice sounded distant and serene rather than concerned. "I think," Patricia replied slowly, feeling a strange calm descending upon her own consciousness. "I think we're about to discover something wonderful." The spiral cloud formation had completely encompassed Flight 914 now, and the passengers found themselves surrounded by light that seemed to contain infinite layers of color and meaning. The sensation was not frightening, quite the opposite. It felt like being wrapped in the most comfortable blanket imaginable, suspended in a moment of perfect safety and understanding. Captain Morrison made one final entry in his flight log, his handwriting steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. 10:43 a.m. Entered unusual weather formation. Navigation instruments non-functional. Time appears to be different here. Will attempt to maintain course to Caracas. And then, as gently as falling asleep after a long and tiring day, Flight 914 slipped out of the normal flow of time and began a journey that would last exactly 37 years, 2 months, and 15 days. Though for the passengers and crew aboard the aircraft, it would feel like only the briefest of moments. The last thing Mrs. Rodriguez remembered before entering that timeless state was looking at her grandson's photograph and feeling an overwhelming sense of love and anticipation for their meeting. She had no way of knowing that when she finally held him in her arms, he he would be older than she appeared to be. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about that moment of transition was the complete absence of fear among everyone aboard Flight 914. Instead of terror at the unknown, they felt only a profound sense of peace and trust in whatever intelligence was guiding their journey through the impossible. In the spaces between seconds, in the pause between heartbeats, in the eternal now that exists beyond the constraints of linear time, Flight 914 continued its voyage toward a destination that was both exactly where they expected to arrive and utterly beyond their wildest imagination. Chapter 2: The Watchers and the Waited. While Flight 914 journeyed through dimensions that exist beyond normal human understanding, the world they had left behind struggled to comprehend their sudden disappearance. Air traffic controller James Patterson stared at his radar screen with growing alarm as the blip representing Flight 914 flickered once, twice, and then vanished entirely from his display. For several seconds, he remained perfectly still, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just witnessed. In 15 years of guiding aircraft through South Florida airspace, he had never seen a radar contact simply disappear without explanation. Flight 914, Miami Control, please respond. Patterson spoke into his microphone, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the cold knot of dread forming in his stomach. The speaker above his console remained stubbornly silent, filled only with the soft static that air traffic controllers knew all too well. Patterson's supervisor, Frank Kowalski, noticed the younger man's increasing agitation and moved to stand behind his chair. Kowalski had been working air traffic control since the early days of commercial aviation, and his experienced eye immediately recognized the signs of a developing emergency situation. "What's the status on Flight 914, Jim?" Kowalski asked, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 3 decades in aviation. "Sir, I've lost all contact," Patterson replied, his hands moving across the radar controls as he attempted to reacquire the missing aircraft. They were tracking normally at 8,000 feet, southeast bound for Caracas, and then they just disappeared from the screen. Can you imagine the confusion and growing fear in that control tower? The way routine procedures suddenly seemed inadequate when faced with the inexplicable? Kowalski leaned over Patterson's shoulder, studying the radar display with the intensity of a man who understood that every second of delay could mean the difference between life and death for the 57 people aboard the missing aircraft. Any distress calls? Any indication of mechanical problems? Nothing, sir. Captain Morrison's last transmission was routine, acknowledging his flight path and reporting normal conditions. Then radio silence. Within minutes, the Miami control tower became the center of an expanding emergency response that would eventually involve the United States Coast Guard, the Civil Aeronautics Board, and multiple government agencies. Emergency protocols developed over years of aviation experience swung into action with mechanical precision, each participant playing their assigned role in the desperate search for answers. Coast Guard Rescue Coordination Center received the alert at 11:17 a.m., exactly 34 minutes after Flight 914's last confirmed radar contact. Chief Petty Officer Robert Martinez had coordinated dozens of search and rescue operations during his naval career. But something about this particular case struck him as unusual from the very beginning. The weather conditions in the search area are perfect, Martinez explained to his team during the initial briefing. Visibility unlimited, seas calm, no storm activity anywhere in the region. If that aircraft went down, we should be able to spot debris or survivors without difficulty. 3 Coast Guard cutters and 2 rescue aircraft were dispatched to the last known position of Flight 914, beginning a search pattern that would eventually cover over 10,000 square miles of Caribbean waters. The search crews expected to find the typical signs of an aircraft accident at sea: floating debris, life rafts, oil slicks, perhaps survivors clinging to wreckage. Instead, they found absolutely nothing. The ocean in the area where Flight 914 had vanished appeared completely undisturbed. The water was so clear that search aircraft could see straight down to the ocean floor in many areas, revealing nothing more than the natural coral formations and marine life that had inhabited these waters for centuries. No debris, no oil slicks, no disturbance of any kind. "It's as if they simply ceased to exist," reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh from the deck of the Coast Guard cutter Vigilant. "We've been searching for 6 hours now, and we haven't found so much as a floating life preserver." Meanwhile, back on shore, the families of Flight 914's passengers and crew were beginning to receive the phone calls that every traveler's family dreads. The conversations followed a familiar and heartbreaking pattern: expressions of concern, requests for patience, assurances that everything possible was being done to locate their loved ones. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter, Carmen, was feeding baby Miguel when the telephone rang in her small apartment in Caracas. The voice on the other end of the line spoke careful, practiced words designed to convey serious concern without creating panic. "Mrs. Gutierrez? This is Maria Santos from Pan American Airways in Caracas. I'm calling about your mother's flight from Miami this morning. We've temporarily lost radio contact with the aircraft, and we wanted to keep you informed of the situation." Carmen felt the world tilt slightly as she processed the words. Her mother's flight should have landed hours ago. Mrs. Rodriguez had promised to call the moment she arrived at the airport, eager to hear Miguel's voice over the telephone before taking a taxi to their apartment. "What do you mean you've lost contact?" Carmen asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she clutched her baby closer to her chest. "It's probably just a radio malfunction," the airline representative replied with practiced reassurance. "These things happen more often than you might think. We're working with air traffic control and the Coast Guard to locate the aircraft. I'll call you again as soon as we have more information." But Carmen had heard something in the woman's voice, a tension that contradicted her optimistic words. As she hung up the telephone, Carmen looked down at her baby son's trusting face and felt a premonition of loss that would haunt her for the next 37 years. In New York, Thomas Chen's wife Mary was preparing dinner when her phone rang. The conversation was brief and devastating in its understated urgency. After hanging up, Mary sank into a kitchen chair and stared at the table setting she had prepared for one. The lonely dinner of a wife whose husband was supposed to be conducting business in a foreign country. The casserole in the oven filled the apartment with the aroma of her husband's favorite meal, a homecoming surprise she had planned for his return. Now, the familiar smell seemed to mock her with its assumption of normal routines and expected arrivals. Captain Morrison's wife, Dorothy, was hanging laundry in the backyard of their suburban Miami home when a Pan American Airways representative arrived at her front door. Their 3 children, ages 8, 10, and 12, were playing in the neighborhood, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm afraid I have some concerning news about your husband's flight today." Dorothy had been expecting William home for dinner. She had promised the children they could stay up late to hear about Daddy's flight to Venezuela, and she had prepared his favorite meal as a welcome home surprise. The sight of the uniformed airline official at her door transformed her cheerful afternoon into the beginning of a nightmare that would last for decades. But perhaps the most poignant moment of that terrible day occurred in the Miami control tower, where James Patterson remained at his station long after his shift should have ended. The young air traffic controller stared at his radar screen as if the missing blip might somehow reappear through the force of his will and hope. His supervisor had offered to relieve him, but Patterson felt a personal responsibility for the 57 people who had vanished from his screen. In his mind, he replayed the last conversation with Captain Morrison over and over, searching for some clue he might have missed, some indication that could explain the impossible disappearance. Flight 914. You are cleared for takeoff on runway 09. Wind is from the southeast at 8 knots. Visibility unlimited. Have a safe flight, Captain Morrison. Those words would echo in Patterson's memory for the rest of his life. He would eventually retire from air traffic control, unable to shake the feeling that somehow, in some way he couldn't understand, those 57 people were still out there somewhere, waiting for guidance home. As night fell over South Florida, the search and rescue operation continued under floodlights and the pale glow of the full moon. Coast Guard vessels swept their searchlights across the dark waters, creating moving patterns of light and shadow that revealed nothing but the endless, empty sea. The official investigation began the following morning, led by a team of experienced accident investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board. They would spend months analyzing weather data, examining maintenance records, interviewing everyone who had contact with Flight 914 before its departure. The investigators were thorough and professional, following established procedures that had successfully explained dozens of previous aviation accidents. They examined every possible cause: mechanical failure, pilot error, sabotage, severe weather, navigation mistakes. Each theory was carefully investigated and methodically ruled out. The maintenance records for the Douglas DC-4 showed no mechanical problems. Captain Morrison and co-pilot Chen had exemplary safety records and thousands of hours of flight experience. The weather conditions on July 2nd, 1955, had been perfect for flying. The aircraft's fuel load was sufficient for the planned flight with comfortable reserves. Every conventional explanation for the disappearance was systematically eliminated, leaving investigators with a mystery that challenged their understanding of aviation and physics itself. Can you feel the weight of that mystery settling over everyone involved? The way the impossible becomes a burden that must be carried by those left behind? Dr. Harold Brennan, the lead investigator, had never encountered a case that defied logical explanation so completely. In his 20-year career, every aircraft accident had eventually yielded its secrets to careful investigation and scientific analysis. But Flight 914 seemed to exist in a category entirely its own. In my professional opinion, Dr. Brennan wrote in his preliminary report, this aircraft simply vanished from our physical reality. I cannot provide any scientific explanation for such an occurrence. But the evidence, or rather, the complete absence of evidence, supports no other conclusion. The families of Flight 914's passengers and crew gradually accepted that their loved ones were gone, though the absence of any physical evidence made closure nearly impossible. Memorial services were held, death certificates were eventually issued, and life slowly resumed its forward motion. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson Miguel grew up hearing stories about the grandmother he had never met, the woman who had vanished while flying to hold him for the first time. Her photograph held a place of honor in his family's home, not a memorial to the dead, but a reminder of love that had transcended the boundaries of explanation. Thomas Chen's wife Mary eventually remarried, though she kept her first husband's business papers in a desk drawer for the rest of her life, unable to throw away the dreams and ambitions that had died with him somewhere over the Caribbean Sea. Captain Morrison's children grew up fatherless, raised by a mother who never quite stopped listening for the sound of his key in the front door. Dorothy Morrison would eventually remarry, finding love again with a kind man who understood that some losses leave permanent spaces in the heart that can be honored but never filled. The file on Flight 914 was eventually closed and stored in a government warehouse, marked as an unsolved aviation disaster. The mystery joined the ranks of other unexplained disappearances that occasionally surface in books and documentaries about strange phenomena. But in the spaces between moments, in dimensions that exist beyond normal human perception, Flight 914 continued its journey through time, carrying 57 souls toward a reunion with the world they had left behind. A world that would be unrecognizably different when they finally returned to it. The question that no one could answer in 1955 was not whether they would return, but when and in what condition. The answer to that question was still 37 years, 2 months, and 15 days away, measured by the clocks and calendars of a world that had learned to exist without them. Chapter 3. The Long Sleep Between Worlds. In the realm where Flight 914 traveled, time moved like honey poured on a winter morning, thick, golden, and flowing according to laws that bore no resemblance to the mechanical precision of earthbound clocks. The passengers and crew experienced this journey not as sleep, but as the most profound state of peaceful awareness imaginable. Consciousness remained, but it was consciousness expanded beyond the normal boundaries of individual identity. Mrs. Rodriguez found herself simultaneously aware of her own thoughts and somehow connected to the experiences of every other soul aboard the aircraft. She could sense Thomas Chen's dedication to his work, his love for his young wife, his dreams of building a successful career that would provide security for the family he hoped to start. She felt Captain Morrison's quiet pride in his profession, his deep love for Dorothy and their 3 children, his satisfaction in safely guiding passengers across the skies. Can you imagine such a state of being, where the boundaries between self and others become as fluid as morning mist, where love and understanding flow freely between souls like light through crystal? The aircraft itself seemed to exist in a state of suspended animation, every mechanical component frozen at the peak of perfect operation. The engines continued their steady rhythm, but it was a rhythm measured in eternities rather than revolutions per minute. The propellers turned so slowly that individual blades could be observed as they carved through air that sparkled with possibilities. Patricia Williams moved through the cabin in a dreamlike state, attending to passengers who had no needs because they existed in a realm of perfect contentment. She offered comfort to travelers who felt no discomfort, served refreshments to people who experienced no hunger or thirst, provided reassurance to souls who had discovered perfect peace. In the cockpit, Captain Morrison and co-pilot Chen maintained their vigil over instruments that displayed readings from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their navigational equipment showed not just their position in normal space, but their coordinates in realms where distance was measured in years, decades, and centuries rather than miles or kilometers. The compass that had spun wildly before their entry into the temporal anomaly now pointed steadily toward something far more significant than magnetic north. It indicated the direction of home, not just their geographical destination, but the temporal coordinates of the world where they belonged, the moment when their return would serve the greater purpose for which their journey had been designed. During their passage through the spaces between moments, the passengers of Flight 914 were granted glimpses of knowledge that expanded their understanding of existence itself. They saw time not as a river flowing in one direction, but as an ocean with currents, eddies, and depths that connected every moment that had ever been or would ever be. Mrs. Rodriguez witnessed the entire life of her grandson Miguel unfolding before her awareness, like the pages of a book. She saw him taking his first steps, speaking his first words, growing from infant to child, to young man, to father, to grandfather. She experienced his joys and sorrows, his successes and failures, his moments of doubt and his triumphs of spirit. The knowledge brought her not sadness at what she would miss, but profound joy at the fullness of the life he would live. She understood, with a certainty that transcended hope or faith, that love creates connections that persist beyond the normal boundaries of time and space. Thomas Chen found his awareness expanding to encompass not just his own ambitions, but the vast web of economic and social forces that shaped the world of commerce. He saw how individual decisions rippled outward through time, affecting people and events in ways that could never be calculated using conventional analysis. His business presentation, so crucial to his sense of professional success, revealed itself as just one small thread in a tapestry of human endeavor that stretched across generations. He saw how the meeting he was traveling to attend would eventually lead to developments he had never imagined, how his work would contribute to changes that would reshape entire industries. But more importantly, Thomas glimpsed the deeper purpose behind his journey through time. He was being prepared to serve as a bridge between different eras of human understanding, carrying knowledge from one age to another in ways that would help humanity navigate the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Captain Morrison's expanded awareness encompassed the entire history and future of human flight. He witnessed the Wright brothers' first tentative hop at Kitty Hawk, the barnstorming pilots of the 1920s, the heroic airmen of World War II, and the commercial aviation industry that was transforming travel in the 1950s. But he also saw further ahead, to jets that would carry hundreds of passengers across oceans in hours, to spacecraft that would carry humans to the moon and beyond, to aircraft that would one day navigate not just through the atmosphere, but through time itself. He understood that his own journey was helping to prepare humanity for technologies that would make time travel as routine as flying from Miami to Caracas. The flight attendant, Patricia Williams, experienced a profound expansion of her understanding of service and compassion. She saw how every act of kindness, no matter how small, created waves of positive influence that spread outward through time like ripples on a still pond. Her work aboard Flight 914, making passengers comfortable, offering reassurance, providing human connection during travel, revealed itself as preparation for a much larger role. She was learning to serve not just individual passengers, but humanity itself as it journeyed toward expanded awareness and capability. All of them began to understand that their disappearance was not an accident or random occurrence, but part of a carefully orchestrated education designed to prepare both themselves and the world they would eventually return to for revelations that would fundamentally change human understanding of reality. In the timeless realm where they traveled, the passengers encountered beings of pure consciousness who served as their guides and teachers. These entities existed primarily as patterns of love, wisdom, and understanding that communicated directly with human awareness without the limitations of language or physical form. The beings explained that Flight 914's journey was occurring during a crucial period in human development. The species was approaching technological capabilities that could either elevate civilization to unprecedented heights or destroy it entirely. The choice between these outcomes would depend on whether humanity developed sufficient wisdom to use its expanding powers responsibly. Your journey serves multiple purposes. The beings communicated in harmonies of meaning that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to consciousness. You are learning to exist beyond the normal constraints of linear time, preparing you to serve as guides for others who will eventually make similar journeys. But you are also providing an example for your species, proof that consciousness can transcend apparent limitations when it is ready to embrace expanded possibilities. The passengers learned that throughout human history, selected individuals had been taken on similar journeys, returning to their own times with knowledge and abilities that helped guide human development. The legends of people who disappeared mysteriously and returned with supernatural wisdom were not myths, but historical records of an ongoing educational process. Every species that successfully evolves beyond planetary boundaries must eventually master the relationship between consciousness and time, the beings continued. Those that fail to develop this understanding destroy themselves with technologies they are not wise enough to control. Your species stands at that critical threshold now. Mrs. Rodriguez asked why they had been chosen for this particular journey, and the answer revealed the profound criteria that governed such selections. You were chosen not for your individual accomplishments, but for the purity of your intentions and the depth of your capacity to love others more than yourselves. Mrs. Rodriguez travels to meet her grandson for the first time. Thomas Chen works to build a better life for his wife and future family. Captain Morrison and his crew dedicate their lives to safely carrying others to their destinations. Patricia Williams finds joy in serving passengers and making their journey comfortable. All of you exemplify the qualities that will be essential for humanity's successful evolution. As their journey through timeless realms continued, the passengers began to understand that they would eventually face a choice. They could return to their original time period with no memory of their extraordinary experience, resuming their lives exactly as they had been planned to unfold. They could return to a future time period, retaining their enhanced understanding and serving as bridges between normal human awareness and expanded consciousness. Or they could release their attachment to linear existence entirely, joining the cosmic teachers who guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the universe. But that choice still lay ahead, waiting for the moment when their education was complete and the world was ready to receive the gifts they would bring. For now, they continued their journey through realms where love was the fundamental force that connected all existence, where wisdom flowed freely between souls, and where time revealed itself as nothing more than a tool that consciousness could learn to use with the same skill that a master craftsman uses a fine instrument. In the gentle suspension between moments, Flight 914 and its 57 passengers continued their voyage toward a reunion with time, space, and a world that had spent 37 years learning to exist without them, though it had no idea how much it had been missing their presence in the larger tapestry of human possibility. The next phase of their journey was approaching, and with it, the moment when the impossible would become undeniable, when the miraculous would manifest in ways that even the most imaginative human minds could barely comprehend. But for now, there was only peace, understanding, and the infinite love that connects all consciousness across every dimension of existence. Chapter 4. The Night Watch. 37 years, 2 months, and 14 days after flight, 914 vanished from radar screens over the Caribbean. Air traffic controller Maria Santos was working the late shift at Caracas International Airport, unaware that she was about to become a crucial witness to one of the most extraordinary events in aviation history. The date was September 8th, 1992, and the world had changed dramatically since that July morning in 1955, when 57 people had disappeared into a spiral of light and possibility. The Cold War that had dominated global politics during the Eisenhower era was ending. Computers were beginning to transform every aspect of human life, and aviation technology had advanced to levels that would have seemed like science fiction to passengers boarding a Douglas DC-4 in 1955. Maria Santos had never heard of Flight 914. The case had been closed decades before she was born, filed away in government archives with other unsolved mysteries that occasionally surfaced in books about unexplained phenomena. She was 28 years old, a dedicated professional who took pride in safely guiding aircraft through some of the busiest airspace in South America. The night shift at Caracas International was typically quiet, with most scheduled commercial flights arriving earlier in the evening. Maria used the peaceful hours to catch up on paperwork, monitor weather conditions, and maintain the vigilant awareness that her profession demanded. The radar screen displayed only a few cargo flights making their way across the Venezuelan landscape, their steady electronic blips creating patterns as familiar and comforting as a favorite piece of music. Outside the control tower, the airport slept under a canopy of stars that blazed with the intensity only possible in the clear mountain air of the Venezuelan highlands. The lights along the runways created geometric patterns against the darkness, ready to guide any aircraft that might request permission to land. Can you feel the peaceful routine of that night? The way familiar duties can create a sense of security and order, even when extraordinary events are approaching just beyond the horizon? At exactly 11:16 p.m., Maria noticed something unusual on her radar screen. A new contact had appeared approximately 50 miles northeast of the airport, moving steadily toward Caracas at a speed consistent with a commercial aircraft. The blip appeared suddenly, as if the aircraft had materialized out of thin air rather than approaching from beyond her radar range. Maria blinked hard and rubbed her eyes, certain that fatigue was causing her to see things that weren't actually there. She had been working double shifts recently, covering for a colleague who was recovering from surgery, and exhaustion could play tricks on even the most experienced controller's perception. But the blip remained on her screen, maintaining a steady course toward the airport. Maria checked her flight schedules, confirming what she already knew. There were no aircraft scheduled to arrive from that direction at this hour. All regional airports had reported their evening departures hours earlier, and no international flights were expected until the morning. Unidentified aircraft, this is Caracas Control. Maria spoke into her headset, her voice carrying the professional authority that came from years of training. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. The response that crackled through her headphones made her question her own sanity. Caracas Control, this is Pan American Flight 914, requesting immediate clearance to land. We are low on fuel and have been experiencing navigation difficulties. Maria stared at her radio equipment in stunned disbelief. Pan American Airways had ceased operations more than a year earlier, its distinctive logo and proud history relegated to aviation museums and the memories of travelers from an earlier era. No aircraft had carried the Pan Am designation for months. But there was something else about the call sign that nagged at her memory. A half-remembered story from her aviation training about a mysterious disappearance that had baffled investigators decades earlier. Flight 914, please repeat your call sign and state your departure point, Maria requested, her voice now carrying a slight tremor despite her professional training. The answer that came through her headset seemed to arrive from another world entirely. Caracas Control. This is Pan American Flight 914, Douglas DC-4. Departed Miami International this morning bound for Caracas. Captain William Morrison commanding. We seem to have encountered some unusual weather conditions, and our instruments are, well, they're reading some very strange information right now. Maria's hands shook as she reached for the thick binder containing historical flight records. Her fingers fumbled through pages of yellowed documents, searching for information about flights that had disappeared decades before her birth. When she found the entry for Flight 914, the coffee cup on her desk slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the floor in a spray of ceramic fragments and dark liquid. There it was in faded typescript. Flight 914, Pan American Airways, departed Miami July 2nd, 1955, bound for Caracas. Never arrived, presumed lost at sea. But according to her radar screen, Flight 914 was approaching Caracas International Airport at that very moment, exactly 37 years, 2 months, and 14 days after its mysterious disappearance. Maria immediately pressed the emergency button that would alert her supervisor, but she also continued the radio conversation with what appeared to be an impossible aircraft crewed by people who should have been dead for nearly 4 decades. Flight 914, what is your current fuel status? Maria asked, falling back on standard procedures, even though nothing about this situation could be considered standard. Caracas Control, we show approximately 1 hour of fuel remaining, came Captain Morrison's voice, sounding exactly as professional and competent as it had on July 2nd, 1955. We're requesting immediate clearance to land and assistance from ground services. I need to report some highly unusual circumstances to the appropriate authorities. Maria's supervisor, Carlos Mendez, burst into the control room with the urgency of a man who understood that some situations transcend normal protocols. Mendez had been working at Caracas International for over 20 years, and his experienced eye immediately recognized the signs of a developing emergency. Maria, what's the nature of the emergency? Mendez asked, moving to stand behind her chair and study the radar display. Sir, Maria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I believe we have a situation that requires immediate attention from, well, I'm not sure who should handle something like this. She handed Mendez the open binder showing the historical record of Flight 914's disappearance, then pointed to the radar blip that was steadily approaching their airport. Mendez read the faded document, looked at the radar screen, and experienced the same sense of reality shifting that had affected Maria moments earlier. Flight 914, this is Caracas Airport operations. Mendez spoke into the radio, his voice carefully controlled despite the extraordinary circumstances. Please confirm your departure date and time. Caracas operations, we departed Miami International Airport this morning, July 2nd, at approximately 9:45 a.m. local time, Captain Morrison responded. Our estimated flight time to Caracas was 3 hours, but we seem to have encountered some kind of severe weather disturbance that has affected our navigation equipment. What is the current local time? Mendez looked at Maria, both of them understanding that they were about to deliver news that would challenge everything the people aboard that aircraft understood about reality itself. Flight 914. The current local time is 11:23 p.m., September 8th, 1992. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across decades. When Captain Morrison's voice finally returned to the radio, it carried a note of confusion that suggested he was processing information that his mind could not easily accept. Caracas operations, please repeat the date. Our instruments are showing July 2nd, 1955. Flight 914, Today's date is September 8th, 1992. You have been missing for 37 years. Another long silence followed, during which Maria and Mendez could only imagine the conversations taking place aboard an aircraft that had somehow traveled through nearly 4 decades in what its crew and passengers experienced as a few hours of flying time. Emergency vehicles began positioning themselves along the runway, their red and blue lights painting the night in urgent colors. Airport security established a perimeter around the landing area, though no one was quite sure what they were securing against. Word of the impossible situation spread through the airport with the speed of wildfire, drawing personnel from every department to witness what appeared to be aviation history in the making. The aircraft that appeared in the night sky looked exactly as a Douglas DC-4 should look. Silver fuselage gleaming under the airport lights, 4 Pratt & Whitney engines providing the distinctive sound that older aviation enthusiasts remembered from the golden age of prop-driven airliners. But there was something ethereal about the aircraft's appearance, as if it existed not quite entirely in the normal physical world. The lights along its wings seemed brighter than they should be, and there was a subtle shimmer around its edges that suggested it was still partially connected to whatever dimensional realm had preserved it for 37 years. Flight 914, you are cleared to land on runway 23, Maria announced, her voice carrying steady professionalism despite the historic significance of the moment. Emergency services are standing by. The landing was perfect, executed with the skill of an experienced pilot who had no idea that the world he was returning to bore little resemblance to the one he had left that morning. The Douglas DC-4 settled onto the runway with the grace of a bird returning to its nest after a long migration through uncharted territories. As the engines powered down and the aircraft came to a complete stop, emergency vehicles surrounded it with flashing lights and personnel trained to handle every conceivable type of aviation emergency, except, perhaps, time travel. Maria watched from the control tower as ground crew wheeled mobile stairs to the passenger door of Flight 914. In a few moments, 57 people would emerge from that aircraft, carrying with them experiences and knowledge that would challenge humanity's understanding of time, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. But what none of the airport personnel could know was that the passengers and crew of Flight 914 had not spent 37 years in unconscious suspension. They had journeyed through dimensions where time flowed differently, where consciousness expanded beyond normal human limitations, and where they had been carefully prepared for the role they were about to play in humanity's continued evolution. The door of Flight 914 opened, and Captain William Morrison appeared at the top of the mobile stairs, looking exactly as he had on July 2nd, 1955. Behind him, 56 passengers and crew members prepared to step back into a world that had aged nearly 4 decades in their absence. The question that would soon dominate the thoughts of investigators, government officials, and curious observers around the world was not just how Flight 914 had traveled through time, but why it had chosen this particular moment to return. The answer to that question would reveal purposes and possibilities that extended far beyond the mystery of a single aircraft and its passengers. Flight 914's return marked the beginning of humanity's gradual awakening to capabilities and responsibilities that would reshape the species' understanding of its place in the universe. But for now, there was only the profound moment of reunion between the lost and the world that had learned to exist without them, a world that was about to discover how much it had truly been missing. Chapter 5. The Reunion with Tomorrow. The first person to emerge from Flight 914 was Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, moving slowly but steadily down the mobile stairs with the careful precision of a 73-year-old woman who had just completed what she believed to be a routine 3-hour flight from Miami. Airport medical officer Dr. Carmen Vasquez stepped forward to assist the elderly passenger, immediately noticing something extraordinary about Mrs. Rodriguez's appearance. The woman looked exactly as she should look for someone her age, but there was something indefinably different about her presence, a quality of serenity and expanded awareness that seemed to radiate from her like warmth from a gentle fire. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Vasquez," Carmen said, offering her arm for support. "How are you feeling? Are you experiencing any discomfort or confusion?" Mrs. Rodriguez smiled with a peace that seemed to encompass far more than relief at safe arrival. "I feel wonderful, dear. Perhaps a little different somehow, but wonderful. Could you please help me contact my daughter? I know Carmen must be worried about me. My flight seems to have taken longer than expected." Dr. Vasquez felt her throat constrict as she realized she would soon need to explain to this gentle woman that her daughter Carmen, the Dr. Carmen Vasquez's namesake, was now 74 years old, a great-grandmother who had spent nearly 4 decades mourning her mother's disappearance. Can you imagine the complexity of emotions in that moment? The joy of an impossible reunion, tempered by the profound displacement of people who belonged to a different time? Thomas Chen appeared next, carrying his briefcase of business papers as if he were still preparing for his crucial meeting with Venezuelan investors. The young accountant looked around the modern airport terminal with growing confusion, noting architectural details and technology that seemed decades more advanced than what he had expected to find in 1955 Caracas. "Excuse me." Thomas approached Airport Operations Manager Carlos Mendez, his voice carrying the polite confusion of a man trying to make sense of an impossible situation. "I don't mean to sound foolish, but everything here looks so modern, much more advanced than I expected. Are we actually in Caracas?" Mendez had been dreading these conversations, but his 20 years of experience in airport operations had taught him that honest communication, however difficult, was always preferable to confusion and uncertainty. "Sir, you are indeed in Caracas," Mendez replied gently. "But I need to prepare you for some information that may be difficult to understand. According to our records, your flight has been missing for 37 years. Today's date is September 8th, 1992. Thomas stared at Mendez for several seconds, his mind processing information that challenged every assumption he held about reality. Finally, he opened his briefcase and pulled out a newspaper he had purchased at Miami International Airport that morning. The newspaper was dated July 2nd, 1955. "This is impossible," Thomas whispered, studying the headlines about President Eisenhower and events that had occurred before most of the airport personnel had been born. "We only took off this morning. I have a meeting tomorrow with investors about a factory expansion. My wife Mary is expecting me to call her as soon as I arrive." Dr. Vasquez approached Thomas with the same gentle manner she had shown Mrs. Rodriguez. "Mr. Chen, I understand how confusing this must be. We're going to take you and all the other passengers to a quiet area where we can help you understand what has happened and begin the process of helping you adjust to the current time period." Meanwhile, Captain Morrison and co-pilot David Chen were being interviewed by Airport Security Chief Roberto Martinez, a man whose military background had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but had not prepared him for anything like this situation. "Captain Morrison, I need to ask you some questions about your flight," Martinez said, consulting a clipboard filled with forms that had been hastily adapted from standard emergency procedures. "Can you describe what you experienced during your journey from Miami?" Captain Morrison maintained the professional demeanor that had served him well throughout his aviation career, but his eyes reflected the confusion of a man trying to reconcile his experiences with apparent reality. "We encountered some unusual weather conditions approximately 1 hour into the flight," Morrison replied. "Our instruments began malfunctioning, and we entered what appeared to be a massive spiral cloud formation unlike anything in my 20 years of flying. The passengers became very calm, unusually calm, and time seemed to, well, this is going to sound strange, but time seemed to slow down considerably." Martinez made careful notes, though he suspected that conventional incident reports would be inadequate for documenting this particular case. "What do you remember about the time period between entering the cloud formation and beginning your approach to Caracas?" Martinez asked. Morrison frowned, clearly struggling with memories that seemed to exist in multiple layers of awareness simultaneously. "That's the strangest part of the whole experience. I remember being perfectly aware throughout the entire flight, but it felt like we were flying through some kind of dream state. The passengers seemed to be in constant communication with each other, though I don't recall seeing them speak. And there were presences aboard the aircraft, beings of some kind who seemed to be guiding our journey." "Beings?" Martinez asked, raising an eyebrow. "I know how that sounds," Morrison continued, "but I'm telling you what I experienced. They weren't frightening, quite the opposite. They seemed to be made of pure understanding, I suppose. They communicated without words, sharing information about time, consciousness, and humanity's place in a much larger reality than most people imagine." As the interview continued, it became clear that all of Flight 914's passengers and crew retained memories of their journey through dimensions that existed beyond normal human experience. Unlike typical amnesia cases, they could recall their extraordinary experience with remarkable clarity and consistency. But the medical examinations conducted by Dr. Vasquez and her team revealed results that challenged every principle of biology and medicine. The passengers showed no signs of aging beyond what would be expected from a few hours of travel. Their cellular structure appeared completely normal for their apparent ages in 1955. Blood tests revealed no unusual chemicals, radiation exposure, or evidence of any process that might explain their preservation across nearly 4 decades. Most remarkably, several passengers had been wearing mechanical watches, and every timepiece still showed the correct time from July 2nd, 1955. The watches had continued running throughout their mysterious journey, but somehow their internal mechanisms had experienced only the passage of a few hours rather than 37 years. "It's as if they were placed in some kind of temporal suspension field," Dr. Vasquez explained to the team of specialists who had been hastily assembled to examine the Flight 914 passengers. Their bodies, their possessions, even their perception of time, everything was preserved exactly as it was the moment they encountered whatever phenomenon transported them. While medical personnel struggled to understand the physical aspects of the situation, Airport Chaplain Father Miguel Santos, no relation to Air Traffic Controller Maria Santos, was addressing the psychological and spiritual needs of people who had been displaced across nearly 4 decades. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in a comfortable chair in the airport's VIP lounge, clutching the photograph of her infant grandson, while Father Santos gently explained how much time had actually passed during her journey. "Your grandson Miguel is now 37 years old," Father Santos said softly. "He's a professor at the University of Caracas, married with children of his own. Your daughter Carmen passed away 3 years ago, but she never stopped believing that somehow Someday, you would return. Mrs. Rodriguez studied the photograph of baby Miguel with tears streaming down her face, but her expression showed profound peace rather than devastating grief. "I knew this would happen," she said quietly. During our journey, I was somehow able to see Miguel's entire life unfolding. I watched him grow up, go to school, find love, start a family. I experienced all of it with him, even though I wasn't physically present. The pain of missing those years is real, but so is the joy of knowing that he lived a full and happy life. Father Santos had counseled grieving families for over 20 years, but he had never encountered anyone who described loss and reunion in quite these terms. "How is that possible, Mrs. Rodriguez? How could you have experienced events that happened while you were wherever you were?" "Time isn't what we think it is, Father," Mrs. Rodriguez replied with the quiet certainty of someone who had gained knowledge through direct experience. "It's not a river flowing in one direction. It's more like an ocean with currents and depths that connect every moment that has ever existed. During our journey, we learned to swim in those deeper waters. Similar conversations were taking place throughout the airport as Flight 914's passengers began the complex process of understanding their displacement and the world they had returned to. Thomas Chen learned that his wife Mary had remarried in 1963, unable to wait indefinitely for a husband who had vanished without a trace. She had raised children with her second husband and lived a full life, passing away in 1987, still wondering what had happened to her first love. But rather than devastating grief, Thomas experienced a complex mixture of sadness and gratitude. "I'm sad that I missed our life together," he told the counselor assigned to his case. "But I'm grateful that she found love again and didn't spend her whole life waiting for me. During our journey, I somehow understood that love creates connections that persist beyond normal time and space. Mary and I will always be connected, even though we lived our lives in different time periods." Captain Morrison faced perhaps the most complex family situation of all. His wife Dorothy had remarried in 1963, and his 3 children had been raised by a stepfather who had loved them as his own. The family dynamics were complicated beyond anything psychology textbooks had ever addressed. But when Dorothy, now 72 years old, arrived at the airport to see her time-displaced husband, the reunion transcended conventional understanding of love and loss. "William," she whispered, looking at the man who appeared exactly as he had on the morning he had kissed her goodbye 37 years earlier. "You look exactly the same, not a day older." "Dorothy," Morrison replied, studying the face of the woman he loved, now showing the effects of nearly 4 decades of living. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Their embrace was witnessed by Dorothy's second husband, Harold, a man whose capacity for love and understanding would be tested in ways that no marriage counselor had ever imagined. The situation required a kind of emotional maturity and spiritual generosity that challenged everyone involved to expand their understanding of love, commitment, and family. But perhaps the most significant aspect of Flight 914's return was not the personal reunions and adjustments, but the broader implications for humanity's understanding of consciousness, time, and the nature of reality itself. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a physicist specializing in temporal anomalies and unexplained phenomena, arrived in Caracas within 48 hours of Flight 914's landing. She had spent her entire career studying the edges of what science could explain, and she immediately recognized that this case could revolutionize human understanding of time, space, and consciousness. Her preliminary interviews with the passengers revealed that their journey had been far more than simple time travel. They had been educated by intelligences that existed beyond normal human perception, prepared for roles they were destined to play in humanity's continued evolution. "We're not just returned passengers," Mrs. Rodriguez explained to Dr. Mitchell during one of their sessions. "We're ambassadors from a realm of expanded consciousness. We've been prepared to help humanity understand that reality is far more flexible and responsive to consciousness than most people imagine." Thomas Chen had developed mathematical abilities that allowed him to solve complex equations instantaneously, as if his mind had been upgraded to process information using principles that transcended normal human cognitive limitations. Captain Morrison reported experiencing temporal echoes, brief glimpses of events that had occurred at the same location during different time periods. Walking through the airport, he could see flashes of how the building had appeared decades earlier, or catch glimpses of future developments that hadn't happened yet. Dr. Mitchell documented each case meticulously, but she struggled to find scientific frameworks that could explain these phenomena using conventional physics. "It's as if their consciousness was temporarily expanded beyond normal human limitations," she theorized in her preliminary report. "They may have been exposed to information or energy fields that exist outside our normal dimensional experience, and some residual capacity remains." But the most significant discovery was yet to come. Within days of Flight 914's return, children around the world, specifically children between the ages of 7 and 12, began reporting remarkably similar dreams about the returned passengers. These children had no connection to Flight 914, no knowledge of its story, and came from countries across multiple continents. Yet they all described dreaming about the airplane people who got lost in time and feeling somehow connected to their experiences. The children claimed they could sense the emotional states of Flight 914's passengers with startling accuracy, and several reported helping the passengers understand their new situation during dream states. Dr. Mitchell realized that Flight 914's return was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger phenomenon that was beginning to awaken expanded awareness in human beings around the world. The question was no longer just how Flight 914 had traveled through time, but why their return was triggering awakening consciousness in children who had never heard their story. The answer would reveal purposes and possibilities that extended far beyond the mystery of a single aircraft and its 57 passengers, opening doorways to understanding that would gradually reshape humanity's comprehension of its place in the universe. But that revelation was still to come, waiting for the moment when enough people were ready to accept truth that transcended the comfortable boundaries of conventional reality. Chapter 6. The Children Who Remembered Tomorrow. 3 weeks after Flight 914's impossible return, Dr. Sarah Mitchell received a phone call that would fundamentally change her understanding of the temporal phenomenon she was investigating. The call came from her sister Linda in Boston, who sounded both concerned and bewildered as she described her 8-year-old daughter, Emma's recurring dreams about the airplane people who got lost between yesterday and tomorrow. "Sarah, I know this sounds crazy," Linda said, "but Emma has been having the most vivid dreams about people on an old airplane. She describes them in incredible detail. An elderly woman with a photograph, a young man with business papers, a pilot who looks confused about what year it is. She's never heard anything about your case in Venezuela, and we don't even watch the news around her." Dr. Mitchell felt her pulse quicken. "Linda, I need you to write down everything Emma tells you about these dreams. Don't lead her or ask specific questions. Just let her describe what she experiences. There's more, Sarah. Emma claims she can help them. She says the airplane people are scared and confused about the new world they're in, and she can somehow comfort them during her dreams. She wakes up every morning asking if they're feeling better today. Over the following days, similar reports began flooding in from around the world. Child psychologists in London, Tokyo, Sydney, and dozens of other cities reported that young patients were spontaneously describing dreams about displaced air travelers who needed help understanding time. Dr. Mitchell immediately began coordinating with researchers across multiple continents, documenting what appeared to be a global awakening of enhanced consciousness in children who had no conventional connection to Flight 914. The phenomenon seemed to affect children within a specific age range, roughly 7 to 12 years old, and the consistency of their descriptions was remarkable. They all reported dreaming about the same passengers, using similar language to describe experiences that seemed far beyond their normal developmental capabilities. 9-year-old Marcus Thompson in Lagos, Nigeria, told his mother about the lady with the picture who misses her family, but knows they lived good lives without her. He had never heard of Mrs. Rodriguez, yet his description of her emotional state matched Dr. Mitchell's psychiatric evaluations with uncanny precision. In Stockholm, 10-year-old Astrid Larsson woke her parents at 3 a.m., insisting that she needed to tell the airplane man that his wife Mary had been happy with her second husband and that he shouldn't feel guilty about missing their life together. Her parents had no idea who she was talking about, but her description perfectly matched Thomas Chen's psychological profile. Dr. Mitchell flew to Boston to interview her niece Emma personally, hoping to understand the mechanism behind these extraordinary connections. Emma Crawford was a typical 8-year-old in most respects, energetic, curious, and fascinated by everything from dinosaurs to space exploration. But when Dr. Mitchell asked her about the airplane dreams, the little girl's demeanor shifted into something far more mature and thoughtful. The airplane people went through a door in time, Emma explained, drawing spirals and geometric patterns with her crayons as she spoke. But the door wasn't supposed to be just for them. It was supposed to teach all the children who dream about them how to help people who get lost between different times. Can you picture this scene? An 8-year-old child discussing temporal mechanics with the casual confidence of someone describing the color of the sky. Emma, how do you know about time doors? Dr. Mitchell asked gently. The airplane people told me, Emma replied matter-of-factly. They learned about it when they were in the time cloud. Time isn't like a straight line the way grown-ups think. It's more like a big ball of string, and sometimes the strings touch each other in places where they're not supposed to. Dr. Mitchell made careful notes, recognizing that Emma's description of time as non-linear resonated with advanced theories in theoretical physics. Can you tell me more about how you help the airplane people? Dr. Mitchell continued. Emma paused in her drawing and looked directly at her aunt with eyes that seemed far older than her 8 years. They're scared, because everything in the world looks different from when they left. But I can show them in the dreams that the changes aren't scary. They're just different. Like when you move to a new house and everything feels strange at first. But then you learn where everything is, and it becomes home. Emma's explanation revealed an intuitive understanding of psychological adaptation that impressed Dr. Mitchell with its sophistication and compassion. Over the following weeks, Dr. Mitchell interviewed children from around the world via video conference, documenting a phenomenon that appeared to transcend normal understanding of human consciousness and connection. The children consistently reported that their dreams were not passive experiences, but interactive communications where they could provide comfort, understanding, and guidance to Flight 914's passengers. 12-year-old Keiko Tanaka in Tokyo described helping Captain Morrison understand that his family had lived good lives during his absence. I showed him pictures in the dream of his children growing up happy and strong, Keiko explained through a translator. I told him that love doesn't disappear just because bodies are in different times. 7-year-old Ahmed Hassan in Cairo reported comforting Mrs. Rodriguez about missing her family's milestones. I helped her see that watching her grandson grow up in the time cloud was just as real as being there with her body. Ahmed told his mother, "Love works in different ways than most people understand." But perhaps the most significant aspect of the children's experiences was their claim that the Flight 914 passengers were teaching them in return, sharing knowledge about consciousness and reality that expanded the children's understanding far beyond their chronological age. Emma Crawford began demonstrating mathematical abilities that astonished her teachers. She could solve complex problems intuitively, often arriving at correct answers through methods that she couldn't explain verbally but could demonstrate through drawings and patterns. Marcus Thompson in Nigeria started speaking about physics concepts that his parents had to research in university textbooks to understand. "Consciousness and time are like dance partners," he told his mother. "They move together, but consciousness leads." Astrid Larsen in Stockholm began showing unusual empathy and psychological insight, helping resolve conflicts between her classmates with wisdom that impressed her teachers and school counselors. Dr. Mitchell realized that she was documenting not just a mysterious connection between displaced time travelers and contemporary children, but evidence of a global awakening of enhanced human consciousness. Her research revealed that the children affected by the Flight 914 dreams were developing abilities that suggested human consciousness was more flexible and expandable than conventional psychology recognized. These children appear to be accessing information and capabilities that exist beyond normal cognitive limitations, Dr. Mitchell wrote in her expanding report. Their connection to Flight 914's passengers may be providing them with access to forms of awareness that transcend conventional understanding of space, time, and individual consciousness. But the most startling revelation came when Dr. Mitchell asked the children directly about the intelligence that had transported Flight 914 through time. Emma Crawford's response would haunt the physicist for the rest of her career. The teachers didn't just move the airplane through time. They used the airplane people to wake up all the children who were ready to learn bigger ideas about how everything works. We're supposed to help the grown-ups get ready for the new things that are coming. "What new things?" Dr. Mitchell asked. Emma's answer revealed the scope of changes that Flight 914's return was designed to initiate. Other airplanes and trains, and maybe whole cities that got lost in time will start coming back. Each one will teach people something new about consciousness and reality. But it has to happen slowly, or the grown-ups will get too scared and stop learning. Dr. Mitchell asked Emma if she knew when the next temporal event would occur. The little girl smiled mysteriously. "Soon, very soon. And this time, the grown-ups will be ready to ask better questions because they'll have learned from the airplane people and from us dream children." As Dr. Mitchell compiled her research from around the world, a pattern emerged that suggested Flight 914's return was not an isolated incident, but the first phase of a carefully orchestrated introduction to expanded human capabilities. The children consistently reported that their enhanced abilities and understanding were permanent changes, not temporary effects of their connection to the displaced passengers. They were developing into what could only be described as the next phase of human consciousness evolution. But they also warned that not everyone would be ready to accept the revelations that were coming. Some people and organizations would attempt to use temporal technology for destructive purposes, while others would deny the reality of expanded consciousness even when confronted with undeniable evidence. The airplane people and us dream children are like bridges, Emma explained during Dr. Mitchell's final interview with her. We help people cross over from the old way of thinking about reality to the new way. But everyone has to choose for themselves whether they want to cross the bridge or stay where they are. Emma's words carried a weight of understanding that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old child. Yet Dr. Mitchell had documented similar wisdom from dozens of children around the world. The question that haunted Dr. Mitchell was no longer how Flight 914 had traveled through time, but what responsibilities came with the knowledge that human consciousness was capable of far more than anyone had imagined. The children were preparing humanity for revelations that would challenge every assumption about the nature of reality, consciousness, and human potential. But they were also warning that these revelations would require wisdom, compassion, and courage to navigate safely. As Dr. Mitchell concluded her research phase and began preparing her findings for publication, she understood that she was documenting the beginning of the most significant transformation in human consciousness since the development of language itself. The story of Flight 914 had revealed that humanity was not alone in the universe, that consciousness could transcend apparent limitations, and that the next phase of human evolution was already beginning in the minds and dreams of children around the world. But the larger implications of these discoveries were still unfolding, and the choices humanity made in response to them would determine whether the species evolved toward expanded awareness and capability, or destroyed itself through fear and misuse of powers it wasn't wise enough to handle responsibly. The children who dreamed of Flight 914 carried the seeds of humanity's future, but that future remained unwritten, waiting for the choices that each individual human being would make when confronted with evidence that reality was far more malleable and responsive to consciousness than they had ever dared to imagine. Chapter 7. The Deeper Currents. 6 months after Flight 914's return, the impossible had become routine at the International Institute for Temporal Studies, a research facility hastily established in Caracas to investigate the phenomenon and prepare for similar occurrences. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez sat in a comfortable chair by the window of her apartment in the Institute's residential complex, looking out at the modern skyline of Caracas while holding a photograph that now showed 5 generations of her family. Her great-great-grandson, Miguel Alfonso Rodriguez Santos, was 2 years old and bore a striking resemblance to the infant she had originally traveled to meet in 1955. The reunion with her extended family had been complex and beautiful in ways that defied conventional understanding of relationships and time. Miguel, now 37 years old and a respected professor of archaeology, had spent weeks helping his grandmother understand the world she had returned to, while learning from her about perspectives that transcended normal temporal limitations. "Abuela," Miguel said during one of their conversations, "you speak about time as if you can see all of it at once. How is that possible?" Mrs. Rodriguez smiled with the serenity that had characterized her demeanor since returning from the temporal journey. "During our travels, I learned that time is like a vast tapestry, Miguel. Most people can only see one thread at a time, the present moment they're experiencing. But consciousness can be trained to perceive larger patterns, to see how past, present, and future are all woven together into a single, beautiful design." She had retained abilities that continued to astound the researchers studying Flight 914's passengers. Mrs. Rodriguez could sense emotional states in people with uncanny accuracy, often understanding the needs and concerns of others before they fully recognized these feelings themselves. Dr. Mitchell documented that Mrs. Rodriguez's empathic abilities extended beyond immediate personal interactions. She could somehow sense the emotional climate of entire communities, detecting stress, hope, fear, and joy in collective human consciousness with the precision of a finely tuned instrument. "It's not mind reading," Mrs. Rodriguez explained during one of her sessions with Dr. Mitchell. "It's more like feeling the music of human emotions. Every person creates their own melody, but when you listen carefully, you can hear how all the individual songs blend together into a symphony." Thomas Chen had integrated remarkably well into 1992's world, though his enhanced mathematical abilities continued to develop in ways that challenged conventional understanding of human cognitive potential. The accounting firm that had originally employed him in 1955 had long since been absorbed into a multinational corporation, but Thomas's unique perspective on economic systems and his intuitive grasp of complex financial relationships made him invaluable to researchers studying market dynamics and global economic patterns. "Numbers tell stories," Thomas explained to Dr. Mitchell during one of their regular interviews. "During our journey through the temporal realm, I learned to see mathematics not just as abstract calculations, but as a language that describes the fundamental patterns underlying all reality. Every economic system, every market fluctuation, every financial decision creates ripples that extend far beyond immediate consequences." Thomas had developed the ability to predict market trends and economic shifts with startling accuracy, not through conventional analysis, but through an intuitive understanding of the mathematical relationships that connected all economic activity across time. His insights were being studied by economists around the world, who recognized that his perspective offered understanding of financial systems that transcended traditional analytical methods. Captain William Morrison faced the most complex personal adjustment of any Flight 914 passenger, but his expanded awareness of temporal mechanics was proving invaluable to aviation researchers investigating the possibility of controlled time travel. Morrison's reunion with his family required emotional maturity and spiritual generosity from everyone involved. His wife Dorothy's second husband, Harold, had raised Morrison's 3 children as his own, and the family dynamics required constant navigation of unprecedented relationship complexity. But Morrison's children, now adults with families of their own, embraced their returned father with love that transcended conventional understanding of family structures. They recognized that time displacement had not erased the bonds of love and connection, but had created new forms of relationship that expanded their understanding of what family could mean. Morrison's expanded temporal awareness allowed him to perceive what he called time streams, the probability currents that flowed between past, present, and future. This ability was being studied by physicists investigating the theoretical foundations of temporal mechanics. Flying through normal space requires understanding air currents, weather patterns, and navigation coordinates, Morrison explained to the research team. Flying through time requires understanding probability currents, consciousness streams, and dimensional coordinates. The principles are similar, but the scale is vastly larger. Morrison had begun working with aerospace engineers on preliminary designs for aircraft capable of controlled temporal navigation, sharing insights gained during Flight 914's journey through dimensional space. Patricia Williams, Flight 914's flight attendant, had developed perhaps the most profound understanding of the service and compassion that would be required as humanity awakened to expanded consciousness capabilities. Her role aboard Flight 914 providing comfort and reassurance to passengers during an extraordinary journey, had evolved into a much larger mission of helping people navigate the psychological and spiritual challenges of expanded awareness. Patricia had established counseling programs for individuals experiencing spontaneous awakening of psychic abilities, temporal perception, or other forms of expanded consciousness that were becoming increasingly common around the world. Service means different things at different levels of awareness, Patricia explained during a lecture at the Institute. At the basic level, it means meeting people's physical and emotional needs. At expanded levels, it means helping consciousness itself evolve toward greater love, wisdom, and understanding. Patricia's programs were being replicated in cities around the world as more people reported experiences that transcended normal human capabilities. But the most significant developments were occurring among the dream children who had connected with Flight 914's passengers during the months following their return. These children, now numbering in the thousands across multiple continents, were developing abilities and understanding that suggested they represented the next phase of human consciousness evolution. Emma Crawford, Dr. Mitchell's 8-year-old niece, had become something of a spokesperson for the enhanced children. Her ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms made her invaluable for helping adults understand the changes that were occurring. The airplane people were like teachers who showed us that reality is much bigger than most grown-ups think, Emma explained during a video conference with researchers from around the world. But now, we children are becoming teachers too, helping everyone learn to use consciousness in new ways. Emma's mathematical abilities had continued developing to levels that astounded university professors. She could solve advanced calculus problems intuitively, often arriving at correct solutions through methods that she described as seeing the music in the numbers. Marcus Thompson in Nigeria had developed abilities that allowed him to perceive and influence plant growth and animal behavior through focused consciousness. His parents' garden had become an unofficial research site where botanists studied plant specimens that grew with unprecedented health and vitality under Marcus's attention. Astrid Larsen in Stockholm demonstrated healing abilities that were being studied by medical researchers. She could somehow accelerate tissue repair and immune system function in plants, animals, and humans through focused intention and touch. Dr. Mitchell's research revealed that over 3,000 children worldwide were now demonstrating abilities that transcended conventional understanding of human potential. The common factor connecting all of them was their reported dreams of Flight 914's passengers during the weeks following the aircraft's return. We're witnessing the emergence of enhanced human consciousness on a global scale, Dr. Mitchell wrote in her comprehensive report. The Flight 914 phenomenon appears to have served as a catalyst for activating dormant capabilities that exist within human genetic potential, but are normally unexpressed. But the children consistently reported that their enhanced abilities came with responsibilities and challenges that required careful navigation. Having bigger consciousness means you have to be more careful about how you use it, Emma Crawford explained. If you use expanded awareness just for yourself, it starts to fade away. But if you use it to help other people and make the world better, it keeps growing stronger. The children also warned about individuals and organizations that were attempting to exploit or weaponize the temporal phenomena for destructive purposes. Government agencies from several countries had begun investigating whether the temporal displacement technology could be used for military advantage or intelligence gathering. Corporate interests were exploring commercial applications that could provide enormous profit, but might destabilize economic and social systems. Some grown-ups want to use the new abilities for power and control instead of love and service, Marcus Thompson explained during one of his sessions with researchers. The teachers who helped the airplane people said this would happen. They said humanity would have to choose between using expanded consciousness for wisdom or for selfishness. The children reported that additional temporal events were being planned, but that the timing and nature of these occurrences would depend on how humanity responded to the Flight 914 revelations. If people learn the right lessons from the airplane people, more wonderful things will happen, Astrid Larson told her research team. But if too many people try to use the new knowledge for bad purposes, the teachers might have to wait longer before sharing more advanced understanding. Dr. Mitchell realized that humanity was facing the most significant evolutionary choice in its history. The abilities demonstrated by Flight 914's passengers and the Dream Children represented capabilities that could either elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights or destroy it if misused. The question was not whether humanity possessed the potential for expanded consciousness, but whether it possessed the wisdom and compassion necessary to use such capabilities responsibly. As the first-year anniversary of Flight 914's return approached, the world waited to see whether the aircraft's impossible journey had been humanity's first step toward enlightened evolution, or its first glimpse of powers that would prove too dangerous to handle. The answer would depend on choices being made by individuals around the world, choices about whether to approach expanded awareness with fear or wonder, with greed or generosity, with the desire for control or the commitment to service. The children who had connected with Flight 914's passengers carried the seeds of humanity's future, but that future remained unwritten, waiting for the collective decisions that would determine whether consciousness would expand toward love and wisdom, or contract back into the familiar limitations of fear and separation. The story of Flight 914 had revealed that extraordinary possibilities existed within human potential. But the larger story of how humanity would respond to these revelations was still being written in the choices made by every person who learned about the impossible aircraft and its 57 passengers who had returned from tomorrow with gifts that could transform the world. Chapter 8. The Choice Between Worlds. 1 year to the day after Flight 914's impossible return, every passenger and crew member experienced the same vivid dream that felt more real than waking life itself. They found themselves standing in an infinite library, whose shelves stretched beyond the horizon in all directions, filled with books that seemed to contain all the knowledge that had ever existed or ever would exist. The volumes glowed with their own internal light, and their contents shifted and evolved as the observers watched, displaying information that adapted to each reader's level of understanding and need. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez stood among the towering shelves, still clutching the photograph of her infant grandson that had somehow accompanied her into this realm of pure knowledge. But now the image moved and changed, showing her Miguel at every age of his life: infant, child, student, professor, husband, father, grandfather. You have served as bridges between what your species was and what it is becoming, a presence communicated to all of them simultaneously, bypassing their ears and speaking directly to their consciousness. Your sacrifice of linear time has allowed thousands of children around your world to awaken to expanded awareness. The question now is, what do you choose for your continued existence? The being that had guided their original journey appeared before them, no longer a vague presence, but clearly visible as a form of indescribable beauty and complexity that their enhanced consciousness could now fully perceive. The entity existed as living light that contained infinite layers of wisdom, compassion, and understanding, You now understand, the being continued, that consciousness is not limited by physical form or temporal boundaries. You have learned that love creates connections that persist across all dimensions of reality. You have discovered that service to others expands awareness, while selfishness diminishes it. These lessons were the primary purpose of your journey. Thomas Chen stood surrounded by mathematical equations that wrote themselves in the air, describing the fundamental relationships that connected all existence. The formulas were beautiful beyond description, revealing the elegant simplicity underlying apparent complexity. The choice before you, the being explained, is how you will continue to serve the evolution of consciousness. You may return to your original time period, resuming the lives you would have lived with no memory of this expanded experience. You may remain in 1992, retaining your enhanced understanding and serving as ongoing bridges between normal human awareness and expanded consciousness. Or you may release your attachment to linear existence entirely, joining us in the spaces between moments to guide the evolution of consciousness throughout the cosmos. Captain Morrison stood before navigational instruments that displayed not just spatial coordinates, but temporal and dimensional positions that showed the location of every conscious being in the universe. The scope of existence revealed by these instruments was overwhelming and magnificent. Each choice serves different aspects of the universal plan, the being continued. Those who return to 1955 will live their original lives, but their consciousness will carry subtle influences from this journey that will benefit everyone they encounter. Those who remain in 1992 will serve as teachers and guides for humanity's continued awakening. Those who join us will help shepherd the consciousness evolution of countless species across infinite worlds. Patricia Williams found herself surrounded by images of every person she had ever served, from airline passengers to the individuals she had counseled at the Institute. Each person glowed with their own unique light, and she could see how every act of service had created expanding ripples of positive influence throughout time and space. The decision must be made individually and with complete freedom. The being emphasized, no choice is superior to others. Each serves the larger purpose in its own essential way. Consider carefully what form of service calls most strongly to your expanded awareness. Mrs. Rodriguez studied the photograph of her grandson, which now showed not just his physical form, but the luminous quality of his consciousness, his capacity for love, his potential for growth and service to others. "If I return to 1955, she asked, will I lose the understanding I've gained about the nature of time and consciousness?" "Your conscious memory will fade," the being replied, "but the wisdom will remain as intuitive knowing that guides your choices and relationships. Your love will be deeper, your compassion more comprehensive, your service more effective, though you will not remember why." Mrs. Rodriguez considered her options carefully. She had experienced the joy of reunion with her family in 1992, but she had also seen how her displacement had caused decades of grief and loss. The opportunity to return to 1955 would erase that suffering and allow her to live the full life with her family that had been interrupted. But she had also witnessed the profound need for guides who could help humanity navigate the challenges of expanded consciousness. The children who dreamed of Flight 914's passengers would need adult allies who understood the realities they were experiencing. "I choose to remain in 1992, Mrs. Rodriguez decided. "My family lived good lives without me. But there are people in this time who need help understanding that love transcends all boundaries. I can serve that need." Thomas Chen contemplated the mathematical beauty of existence that surrounded him, recognizing equations that described not just physical relationships, but the dynamics of consciousness, love, and spiritual evolution. If I remain in 1992, he asked, what contribution can I make with my enhanced understanding? Your mathematical insights will help bridge the gap between spiritual wisdom and scientific knowledge, the being replied. You will help develop technologies and economic systems that serve consciousness evolution rather than material accumulation. Your work will prepare humanity for capabilities that will emerge over the coming decades. Thomas thought of his wife Mary, who had remarried and lived a full life in his absence. Returning to 1955 would restore their marriage, but remaining in 1992 would allow him to contribute to humanity's larger evolution. I choose to remain in 1992, Thomas decided. Love created connections with Mary that transcend physical presence. I can honor our relationship by using my enhanced understanding to serve the evolution of consciousness. Captain Morrison studied the cosmic navigation instruments, understanding that his expanded awareness of temporal mechanics could contribute to humanity's development of controlled time travel capabilities. I have always been a guide helping others reach their destinations safely, Morrison reflected. If I join you in the spaces between moments, how will that continue my service? You will help countless species throughout the universe navigate their own consciousness evolution, the being explained. Your experience guiding Flight 914 through temporal dimensions has prepared you to assist in the awakening of consciousness on scales you cannot yet imagine. Morrison thought of his family in both time periods, the wife and children who had learned to live without him, and the extended family relationships that had developed around his absence. His return had brought joy, but also complexity that challenged everyone involved. I choose to join you, Morrison decided. My family learned to love and support each other without my physical presence. That love remains real and strong. I can best honor it by serving the evolution of consciousness throughout the cosmos. One by one, each passenger and crew member made their individual choices based on what form of service called most strongly to their expanded awareness. Of the 57 souls aboard Flight 914, 18 chose to return to 1955, retaining no conscious memory of their temporal journey, but carrying enhanced wisdom that would influence every relationship and decision for the rest of their lives. 36 chose to remain in 1992, keeping their expanded understanding and dedicating themselves to helping humanity navigate the challenges and opportunities of awakening consciousness. 3, including Captain Morrison, chose to release their attachment to linear existence entirely, joining the cosmic teachers who guided consciousness evolution throughout the universe. The partings were both heartbreaking and beautiful. Passengers who had shared an impossible journey together embraced goodbye, understanding that their paths were diverging in service to different aspects of the same universal purpose. Those who chose to return to 1955 gradually became translucent, their forms growing lighter and more luminous until they faded from the cosmic library entirely. According to the being who guided them, they were now resuming their original timelines, with their temporal displacement erased from linear history. Those who chose the cosmic path underwent a different transformation. Their physical forms dissolved into pure consciousness, becoming beings of living light capable of existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Captain Morrison's last words to his fellow passengers were, "Every ending is a new beginning. Love transcends all boundaries of time, space, and form." The passengers who remained in 1992 found themselves back in their beds at the Institute, but fundamentally changed in ways that would influence the rest of their lives and the lives of everyone they encountered. Mrs. Rodriguez awakened with tears on her face, but profound peace in her heart. She understood that her choice to remain in 1992 meant accepting the loss of decades with her original family. But she also knew that her service to humanity's consciousness evolution was a way of honoring the love that connected her to all beings across all time. Thomas Chen found that his mathematical abilities had stabilized into a permanent expansion of cognitive capability. He could perceive the numerical relationships that underlay all existence, providing insights that would revolutionize economics, physics, and understanding of how consciousness interacted with material reality. The 36 passengers who remained in 1992 became the founding faculty of the International Institute for Temporal Studies, dedicating their lives to helping humanity prepare for the expanded awareness and capabilities that were gradually awakening around the world. Their work with the Dream Children created educational programs that gently introduced concepts of expanded consciousness to the general public, preparing society for revelations that would challenge every assumption about human potential. But their most important contribution was simply living their lives as examples of what became possible when human beings opened themselves to realities beyond conventional limitations. Mrs. Rodriguez spent her remaining years surrounded by a family that had learned to see her not as a victim of temporal displacement, but as a gift that had been returned to them by forces beyond understanding. Her great-grandchildren grew up with an elderly relative who could sense their needs before they expressed them, who told bedtime stories about traveling through realms where love was the fundamental force of existence. Thomas Chen became an economic theorist whose insights helped develop financial systems based on cooperation rather than competition, sustainability rather than exploitation, and service to consciousness evolution rather than material accumulation. The other remaining passengers found their own ways to serve humanity's awakening, using their enhanced abilities to heal, teach, counsel, and guide others toward expanded understanding of what it meant to be human in a universe where consciousness was the fundamental creative force. The Dream Children continued to mature, carrying abilities and insights that gradually reshaped human society's understanding of education, healing, communication, and relationship. And sometimes, in moments of profound quiet, when the boundary between dimensions grew thin, those who had been touched by the mystery of Flight 914 could sense Captain Morrison and his fellow cosmic guides moving through the spaces between moments, helping other lost travelers find their way toward expanded awareness and service. The story of Flight 914 had concluded, but the larger story of humanity's awakening to its true potential was just beginning, written in the choices made by individuals who had learned that consciousness could transcend any apparent limitation when guided by love, wisdom, and the desire to serve something greater than personal benefit. In the end, Flight 914's impossible journey had revealed that the greatest adventure available to any conscious being was not travel through space or time, but the evolution of awareness itself toward ever greater capacity for love, understanding, and service to the magnificent tapestry of existence that connected all beings across every dimension of reality. Epilogue. The infinite journey continues. 50 years after Flight 914's return, Dr. Emma Crawford Santos stood in her laboratory at the Global Institute for Consciousness Evolution, preparing for humanity's first officially sanctioned journey through controlled temporal dimensions. Emma had been one of the original Dream Children, the 8-year-old from Boston who had helped translate the cosmic teacher's messages and guided Flight 914's passengers through their adjustment to 1992. Now, at 58, she served as Director of Temporal Navigation, overseeing the careful development of technologies that allowed conscious, controlled travel through multiple dimensions of time and space. The work had required decades of patient preparation. The cosmic teachers had been true to their promise, gradually introducing new concepts and technologies through a carefully orchestrated series of temporal events that became known as consciousness expansion lessons. Flight 914's return in 1992 had been followed by the appearance of a Victorian-era passenger ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in 1997, carrying travelers who had vanished during a storm in 1847. Then came the Renaissance village that materialized in rural France for exactly 24 hours in 2001, allowing contemporary observers to interact with artisans and philosophers from the 15th century Italy. Each event had been precisely designed to expand human understanding while providing opportunities for the enhanced children, now adults with extraordinary abilities, to serve as interpreters and guides for the expanding revelations. The technologies that emerged from studying these temporal phenomena had revolutionized human civilization. Time travel was no longer science fiction, but a carefully regulated field of study with applications in historical research, healing trauma across generational lines, and understanding the long-term consequences of current decisions. More importantly, the consciousness abilities awakened by these events had transformed human society itself. Enhanced empathy had reduced conflict between nations and communities. Expanded mathematical understanding had solved environmental and economic challenges that had seemed intractable. Healing abilities had eliminated most disease and extended healthy human lifespan significantly. As Dr. Crawford Santos made final preparations for the current mission, sending a team of volunteers to observe the Library of Alexandria before its destruction, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought humanity to this point. Mrs. Rodriguez had lived to age 126 before peacefully transitioning to what the enhanced humans now understood as expanded dimensional existence. Her great-great-great-grandchildren carried genetic expressions of consciousness abilities that had been activated by her temporal journey, demonstrating that expanded awareness could be passed to future generations. Thomas Chen had revolutionized global economics by developing mathematical models that optimized for consciousness evolution rather than material accumulation. His work had contributed to the elimination of poverty and the creation of economic systems based on cooperation, sustainability, and service to the greater good. The 36 Flight 914 passengers who had remained in 1992 had all lived extraordinarily long and productive lives, serving as bridges between normal human awareness and the expanded capabilities that gradually became available to the entire species. But perhaps most significantly, their examples had helped humanity develop the wisdom necessary to use advanced consciousness technologies responsibly. The cosmic teacher's warnings about the dangers of misusing expanded abilities had proven accurate. Several attempts to weaponize temporal technology or exploit consciousness abilities for personal gain had resulted in temporary revocation of access to advanced capabilities. The children who had originally dreamed of Flight 914's passengers had matured into the spiritual and intellectual leaders of a transformed human civilization. They served as teachers, healers, counselors, and guides, helping others navigate the challenges and opportunities of expanded consciousness. Emma's own children and grandchildren had been born with consciousness abilities that were considered normal for their generation. They could perceive multiple dimensional layers simultaneously, communicate telepathically across vast distances, and heal both physical and psychological trauma through focused intention. But they had also been raised with deep understanding of the responsibilities that came with such capabilities. Enhanced consciousness required enhanced compassion. Expanded abilities demanded expanded service to others, and greater knowledge necessitated greater wisdom in its application. As the temporal displacement chamber hummed to life, its crystalline structures resonating with frequencies that existed in the spaces between moments, Dr. Crawford Santos felt a familiar presence. Standing beside her, as translucent and radiant as ever, was the figure she recognized as one of the cosmic teachers who had guided Flight 914's original journey. The being had appeared to her periodically throughout her life, offering guidance and wisdom as humanity navigated its evolution toward expanded consciousness. "You have exceeded our most optimistic expectations," the teacher communicated directly to her awareness. "Your species has demonstrated that it can develop advanced consciousness capabilities while maintaining the compassion and wisdom necessary to use them responsibly." Emma smiled, remembering her 8-year-old self drawing spirals and circles while trying to explain concepts that adults couldn't initially understand. "What comes next?" she asked, as she had so many times before. The teacher's response filled her with anticipation and wonder. "Now you join us as guides for other species throughout the cosmos. Your experiences, your challenges and breakthroughs, your mistakes and wisdom will help countless other worlds navigate their own consciousness evolution." Emma understood that humanity's graduation into cosmic citizenship meant accepting responsibility for helping guide the development of awareness throughout the universe. The species that had once struggled with basic cooperation was now being invited to serve as teachers for the evolution of consciousness on a galactic scale. "The story of Flight 914, the teacher continued, was never about a single aircraft or its passengers. It was about demonstrating the infinite capacity for growth that exists within any species willing to embrace both mystery and responsibility with equal measures of courage and compassion." As the first officially sanctioned time travelers prepared to depart for ancient Alexandria, Dr. Crawford Santos realized that every human being who had ever wondered about the mystery of Flight 914 had participated in humanity's transformation, whether they realized it or not. The aircraft that had vanished in 1955 and returned in 1992 had served as a catalyst for awakening capabilities that had always existed within human potential, but had remained dormant until the species was ready to use them wisely. The 57 souls who had been willing to sacrifice their linear existence for the benefit of all humanity had created ripples of possibility that continued to expand throughout time and space, touching lives and awakening consciousness in ways that could never be fully measured or comprehended. And in the spaces between moments, where Captain Morrison and his fellow cosmic guides continued their work of helping lost travelers find their way home, the echo of aircraft engines could still be heard, carrying new passengers from countless worlds toward revelations that would expand their understanding of what it truly meant to exist in a universe where consciousness was the fundamental creative force. The mystery of Flight 914 had been solved, but the greater mystery of existence itself continued to invite exploration, understanding, and wonder from all beings willing to embark on that eternal journey toward expanded awareness, infinite love, and service to the magnificent tapestry of consciousness that connected all existence across every dimension of reality. In the end, Flight 914's impossible journey had revealed that the greatest adventure available to any conscious being was not travel through space or time, but the evolution of awareness itself toward ever greater capacity for love, wisdom, and service to the infinite possibilities that awaited any soul brave enough to board that eternal flight toward enlightenment. The aircraft had disappeared into mystery and returned with gifts that transformed human civilization, but its true destination had never been a place or time. It had been a state of consciousness where love transcended all boundaries, where wisdom illuminated all understanding, and where service to others revealed the deepest meaning of existence itself. And so the journey continues, across infinite worlds, through eternal time, toward the endless expansion of consciousness that awaits all beings willing to embrace the mystery and wonder of existence itself. Every ending is a new beginning. Every mystery solved reveals deeper wonders. Every journey completed opens pathways to greater adventures. The story of Flight 914 concludes, but the story of consciousness exploring its own infinite possibilities has only just begun. The legacy continues. As we conclude this extraordinary tale of Flight 914, it's worth reflecting on the profound truths embedded within this mystery that transcends the boundaries of conventional understanding. The story we have witnessed unfold across these pages is not merely an account of temporal displacement, but a meditation on the very nature of consciousness, love, and human potential. Can you feel the weight of possibility settling around you as you consider what this story reveals about the reality we inhabit? The way it challenges every assumption about the limitations we accept as unchangeable facts of existence. The passengers of Flight 914 discovered that time is not the rigid, linear progression we imagine it to be, but rather a fluid medium that consciousness can learn to navigate with the same skill that a master musician navigates the complexities of a beautiful symphony. Their journey revealed that the universe is far more responsive to awareness, intention, and love than our mechanistic worldview typically acknowledges. Mrs. Rodriguez's ability to sense the emotional states of others, Thomas Chen's mathematical insights that bridged science and spirituality, Captain Morrison's perception of temporal currents. These abilities were not supernatural gifts bestowed upon chosen individuals, but natural human capacities that become accessible when consciousness expands beyond its usual boundaries. The children who dreamed of Flight 914's passengers represent something even more profound, evidence that human consciousness is evolving, that our species stands on the threshold of capabilities that will fundamentally transform what it means to be human. These young dreamers demonstrated that expanded awareness is not limited to adults who have undergone extraordinary experiences, but can awaken spontaneously in minds that remain open to possibilities beyond conventional understanding. Perhaps the most significant aspect of the Flight 914 phenomenon is its demonstration that such extraordinary capabilities come with equally extraordinary responsibilities. The cosmic teachers who guided the aircraft's journey emphasized repeatedly that enhanced consciousness must be accompanied by enhanced compassion, that expanded abilities demand expanded service to others, and that greater knowledge requires greater wisdom in its application. This principle echoes through every aspect of the story, from Mrs. Rodriguez's choice to use her empathic abilities in service of others' healing, to Thomas Chen's dedication to developing economic systems that serve consciousness evolution rather than material accumulation, to the Dream Children's commitment to helping humanity navigate the challenges of expanding awareness. The story suggests that we are living in an era when such transformations of human capability are not only possible, but inevitable. The question facing our species is not whether consciousness will expand beyond current limitations, but whether we will develop the wisdom and compassion necessary to use expanded capabilities responsibly. As you drift toward sleep tonight, carried by the gentle rhythm of this narrative, perhaps you might wonder what extraordinary possibilities exist within your own consciousness, waiting to be discovered and developed in service of the greater good. Perhaps you might sense the connections that link you to every other aware being across time and space, recognizing that love truly does transcend all apparent boundaries. The mystery of Flight 914 reminds us that reality is far more magical, more responsive, and more filled with loving intelligence than our everyday experience typically reveals. It suggests that the impossible is simply the possible waiting for consciousness brave enough to embrace it, and that the greatest adventures available to any human being involve not travel through space or time, but the exploration of awareness itself. May your dreams be filled with the peace that comes from understanding that you are part of something infinitely larger and more wonderful than any individual existence. And may you awaken with the quiet knowledge that consciousness itself is the greatest mystery and the most beautiful adventure available to any soul willing to embark upon the eternal journey toward expanded love, wisdom, and service to all existence.